One autumn day in 1796, a man was ushered into a room of a house in the High Street in Glasgow, near to the university. He brought with him fancy-coloured shoes for a child of 3.5. The shoemaker who the man brought them to was James McKean, the man who would go on to murder James Buchanan, the carrier between Glasgow and Lanark. Buchanan had been invited by McKean to drink tea with him in his house that 7th October, after arranging his usual evening journey to Lanark with parcels of banknotes. He would be dead within minutes. The circumstances of the murder were relayed by Mrs. McKean, who was at home with her daughter. The house no longer exists. It consisted of shops off the pavement with a flat above, and attics which were occupied by the McKeans, with the attics being his workshop. The entrance was by an outside stair, which was on the north side of Old Castle Pens Close, and to access McKean's workshop, there was a separate stair off the landing at his house door, which had a knocker. On opening the door, a lobby appeared, and at the far end of this room was where Buchanan was murdered. There was a principal apartment which was fronted to the street. Entering the outer door and off the lobby, on the right, was a kitchen, and off it there was another room also fronting onto the street, which was used by the family as a parlour. The city bells had rung the usual peal at 6 o'clock, while McKean, with his wife and daughter, were in the parlour having tea, when the knocker was heard. McKean hadn't mentioned he'd expected a visitor, but seemed to be watching for something, and when he opened the door, he admitted Buchanan. He showed him to the room where he died. He was only absent from the parlour for just a few minutes when he appeared in the kitchen, took a cloth or towel, and returned to the room, closing the door behind him. Almost immediately, he appeared in the parlour and quickly gathered the crumb cloth from under the table where his wife and daughter were sitting. Mrs. McKean now became alarmed and asked what he was doing. He replied, "I have a drunk man with me," and hurried out of the room with the cloth, followed by his wife into the lobby. However, he slammed the door on her and bolted it from the inside. His wife then opened the main door and went up the stair, clapping her hands, shouting that there had been a murder in her home. McKean, on hearing his wife, came into the lobby, where his hat and greatcoat were hanging, and put his hat on and threw his coat over his arm. He ran down the stairs, and as he passed his wife, shook a clenched fist at her, saying, "Woman, you have done for me now." Baillie Wardlaw and others in authority were soon at the scene of the crime. He sent Mrs. McKean and her daughter away, as it was self-evident that they were innocent in the whole affair. They inspected the room, and it was apparent that McKean had been prepared for murder. Buchanan, who'd been held in high esteem, had been seated in an armchair when McKean attacked him from behind with the razor, nearly severing the man's head from his body. Immediately after the murder became known, the public authorities advised a reward for the discovery and apprehension of McKean, but for 2 days there were no sightings of him. On the 3rd day, information was obtained that a man answering McKean's description had been seen at the Mearns, travelling on the Kilmarnock road. It was therefore surmised he was heading to Ireland, with the intention of getting there on board of some of the coal vessels which regularly sailed from Irvine or Saltcoats. Acting on this information, the magistrates of Glasgow instantly dispatched James McKean, a messenger with a warrant for the apprehension of McKean. When McCrone arrived in Saltcoats, he learned that a coal boat had sailed for Dublin 2 days previously with a cabin passenger. However, the wind had picked up soon after it had left, and he was told that it was likely it had returned to Lamlash Bay. McCrone, having received this information, hired a light boat and set off for Lamlash on Arran. On his arrival, he saw the vessel lying at anchor in the bay, then pulled up beside it. The captain of the coal boat was walking on the deck as McCrone stepped on board. He was informed that the passenger who'd taken his berth in the vessel at Saltcoats was below in the cabin. McCrone drew out his pistol from his pocket, descended into the cabin, and saw McKean sitting at a table reading. McCrone seized him by the neck, flashed the gun at him, and told him he was under arrest for murder. McKean didn't resist the officer as he handcuffed him. On him was £120 and a watch that had belonged to Buchanan. He was then put on board McCrone's little boat, and the pair returned to Saltcoats. The prisoner was brought back to Glasgow and imprisoned. McKean later described what had happened that fateful night. "I started up," he said, "and lifted up the fatal weapon in my right hand, with which the deed was done, and struck him fairly on the throat with it. I declare he received but one stroke from me, but a dreadful stroke it was, for it was given with great violence. He was sitting on a chair, and I was standing up on his right side, and when I had given him the stroke in consequence of feeling it, he suddenly lifted up his right hand to defend himself and grasped me by the arm. In his doing this, the chair he sat upon flew fairly from him to the left side, and I, having the razor still at his throat, followed the stroke and fell down above him, by which he received the whole weight of my body and pressure and force of my arm and the instrument together, as it never went from his throat, till I took it out after he was dead." McKean exonerated his wife and everyone else, and admitted his guilt. He was taken to Edinburgh for trial at the High Court of Justiciary before Robert McKean, Lord Braxfield, his last trial. It was Monday, 12th December 1796. Along with Braxfield was Robert Dundas of Arniston, His Majesty's advocate for the Crown, but McKean chose not to be represented by counsel. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to hang the following January. Rumours abounded. It was reported that he was of a cruel disposition, having, when a youth, put to death his mother's cat by boiling it in a cauldron. He was also suspected of having been involved in his mother's death when she was found drowned, as following it, he inherited a small property. While awaiting to be hanged, he was interrogated by a clergyman who attended to him and hoped to find the truth behind his mother's death. But the only answer he got from McKean was, "Doctor, can you keep a secret?" And after he received the answer yes, he replied, "So can I." On Wednesday, 25th January 1797, McKean was prepared for execution at Glasgow Cross, but before being brought to the platform, he was taken to the town hall, where the authorities waited. After being seated, a glass of wine was handed to him. He appeared calm and collected, but pale. He drank the wine, drinking it genteelly, and bowed to the magistrates and other officials as he drank, as if he'd been exchanging pleasantries over dinner. He appeared on the scaffold dressed in white about 10 minutes past 3 and proceeded to the front with a firm, undaunted air, holding a paper in his hand, and after saying a few words to the 20,000-strong crowd, he gave it to one of the town officials. About 10 minutes later, he mounted the platform with indifference, and after praying for a few minutes, was launched into eternity, without one sympathising tear from the surrounding multitude. He was 44. After McKean had hung the usual time, his body was taken down and given to Dr. Jeffrey for dissection. Some gentlemen in Glasgow were anxious to preserve part of his remains and asked the doctor to give them the skin from McKean's back. He obliged. These gentlemen then sent it to a tank pit to be turned, and what was very curious was that the King's duty was demanded and paid for this tanning of McKean's hide. When the turning operations were finished, the skin had the appearance of a common piece of leather. His skeleton can still be seen at the University of Glasgow. As mentioned, McKean was a shoemaker to trade and was a member of the dissenting congregation. About a fortnight before the murder took place, a gentleman and member of this congregation had called on him to pay off his account for shoes. In paying this account, the gentleman took from his pocket a bunch of small notes amounting to £25 to select one for payments to McKean. He observed the notes very particularly and was surprised at being invited to take his seat for a short time in the back of the shop. The gentleman declined the invitation, although repeatedly urged by McKean to step into the back apartment and to take a seat for a few minutes. The visitor thought little of it at the time, but when the murder of the carrier became known, he felt quite satisfied in his own mind that if he'd complied with McKean's invitation and had indeed taken that seat in the back shop, that he would have been murdered in place of the carrier. If you enjoyed this episode of Scotland's History, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching.